You know, I'm sitting here screaming at the TV, Chris, get out the cage, man. I thought that when he fought Amir Khan, that he was a better fighter, you know. But okay, let me mute this. We want to hear the post-fight interview, but let me mute this. We got a long night of boxing. The Showtime card starts right after this with Gary Russell versus Patrick Highland. But anyway, Chris Algieri has been stopped in the 4th round. He's never been stopped before in his career. He's been down multiple times in his career. Remember, Manny Pacquiao put him down 6 times, but couldn't knock him out. Ruslan Provodnikov put him down, couldn't knock him out. And Amir Khan couldn't knock him out. You know, so now Errol Spence is now, in my opinion, a world-class contender. He is the #1 contender for Kell Brook's IBF 147-pound title, and now it's going to be interesting to see where he goes from here. PBC on NBC, April the 16th, 2016. This was Errol Spence's first time headlining a major card outside of Fox Sports. This was national television. Even though they were competing with the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, and UFC on Fox, this will still be the biggest audience as that Errol Spence and Chris Algieri has ever seen. Chris Algieri fought on HBO, and of course he fought on pay-per-view against Manny Pacquiao. But when you're thinking about national television, this is still going to be around 1 million or so views. And Errol Spence did what he was supposed to do. Listen, dude's body work, his body work, it debilitated Chris Algieri. Chris Algieri couldn't do anything. Once I saw that Chris Algieri was in the turtle shell on the ropes and not throwing any punches, you know, I knew that it was going to be over for him. Chris Algieri is a fighter that's better suited keeping it in the middle of the ring, better suited working off of the jab. You know, him fighting on the back foot, and, you know, no. Errol Spence went out there to destroy him. You know, he literally destroyed Chris Algieri, you know, to the point where Chris Algieri is still a very marketable fighter, but now, you know, you have to question, where does Chris Algieri go, you know, from here? Now, there are fighters still that Chris Algieri can beat, but Errol Spence is just, you know, he's phenomenal. He's phenomenal. Now, where does he go? It's looking like, you know, maybe the IBF is going to order him to fight Kell Brook sometime around the end of this year. I'm not quite sure. Kell Brook has fought Sean Porter, where he won the title from. He fought Jojo Dan, who was the future mandatory, not the mandatory at the time, but the future mandatory. Then he fought Frankie Gavin, who wasn't a mandatory. And then he fought most recently Kevin Bizier, you know, who was a mandatory. So now he's going to be allowed another voluntary that will likely take place. What his promoter is saying, you know, sometime this summer. They were saying in June, but I'm thinking sometime in maybe August, you know, or September. And then the IBF around the end of this year is going to say, okay, you know, you have to fight Errol Spence if he wins his next fight, meaning Kell Brook, you know, or vacate the title. Now, Kell Brook is saying that he wants his next fight to be a big fight. So we don't know who's going to be the champion, you know, when Errol Spence gets his title shot, because they're saying, you know, maybe Kell Brook versus maybe a Danny Garcia, you know. So there could be a possible chance if Danny Garcia, if it was to happen, hypothetically, if it was to happen to beat Kell Brook, then we could see Errol Spence versus Kell Brook. People on social media are already saying feed Danny Garcia to Errol Spence. And listen, Errol Spence dude is sharp. You know, the lefty, we've heard the stories about what he did to Adrian Browne in sparring. They say he knocked him out. We heard about what he did to Floyd Mayweather in sparring, blacked his eye. Floyd Mayweather had to get the vampire facial. And, you know, we've seen, you know, his progression through, you know, from being, you know, a prospect to now a legit, you can say, feared contender. Now, of course, we're going to hear what Chris Algieri has to say. You know, he's going to get all technical with this shit. And Chris Algieri's style, you know, even though you couldn't really underestimate him, his style didn't match up with what we seen from Errol Spence. Look, 96 to 311 for Errol Spence. 36 of 114. He threw 60 more punches. I mean, he landed 60 more punches and threw 200 more. The style, the activity. Total jabs, 23 of 133 for Errol Spence. 3 of 24 for Chris Algieri. But we saw that Errol Spence wasn't trying to box. He was coming out there to put a boot in his ass. Power punches, 73 of 178, 41% for Spence. 33 of 90, 37% for Chris Algieri. And that's Chris Algieri's style. You know, Chris Algieri has a good overhand right. But if I'm correct, Chris Algieri has 8 or 9 knockouts. Let's hear what Errol Spence has to say.
I thought it was going to be late, to tell you the truth, but Chris Algieri's a tough fighter, and I just thank him for this opportunity he gave me.
You had told us earlier that no one had really pushed you into deep waters. Did he push you into deep waters today, going into the 6th?
He tested me a little bit, but he didn't push me into deep waters. I was prepared for everything that he came with.
Well, you did something that Manny Pacquiao couldn't do. You knocked out this young man, which is very important. A lot of folks don't know you are from New York. You're a New York native, even though you have the draw from Texas. The big question is now, what do you want to do next? A lot of speculation of where you might go.
I think now I'm the number one contender to Kell Brook. So Kell Brook knows what time it is. You know, we got to get in the ring and fight. Danny Garcia and all the rest of the welterweight champions. I want them all. Doesn't matter who.
We're going to put you to work and have you look at some of these highlights. Tell us what you saw here, what was going through your mind. I know Derek James was...
Well, there you said it. I mean, there you said it. You know, Kell Brook. Now, here's something interesting to think about. Do you think that when Al Heyman, who advises both Charles Martin and Errol Spence, you know, when Al Heyman, you know, negotiated with Eddie Hearn, who's the promoter of Anthony Joshua and Kell Brook, do you think that he maybe have talked about, or maybe at some point in time, you know, mentioned, well, listen, if I give you Charles Martin now, you know, for Anthony Joshua, and likely Anthony Joshua will win, then you got to do me a favor and let me send Errol Spence over there to the UK for Kell Brook and don't give me no issues. You know, you think maybe that was a conversation that could happen? Could have happened? Let me see if he got anything interesting to say.
Your trainer, Derek James, has prepared you well. You came back here, lots of family from Long Island, the New York area. As I said, you were born in Brentwood. Your daughter, Ivy, looking up. What was it mean to you from Texas to come back to New York and get this victory now at 20-0?
It means a lot. You know, this is where I was born. This is where my family is on both sides. So it means a lot to fight in front of my family, fight in front of my daughter for the first time. And now tomorrow I get to see my grandma and my daughter get to meet her great-grandmother.
Well, it's a huge victory for you. How much time will you take off before Derek calls you back into the gym?
I didn't take too much punishment.
Did you think Al Heyman?
Take off from the training camp. The training camp was hard. And we'll probably take off 2-3 weeks and get back in the gym and talk to my manager and see where I go from here.
Errol, congratulations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Kenny?
All right.
Let's talk about the event. It was in the Barclays Center. Reports were that the arena was less than half full, and that can be expected. You know, Errol Spence is not really a known name outside of the hardcore fans. Chris Algieri is from New York, but he, you know, doesn't really have a strong fan base. There wasn't any real stars in attendance as far as PBC boxers. For example, you know, you would think that a Keith Thurman versus a Sean Porter, Keith Thurman or Sean Porter would have been there. Keith Thurman and Sean Porter has now been confirmed to be fighting in the Barclays Center June the 25th. You know, like I said, they were competing with the playoffs, and also there's a card on Showtime, you know, the same night. So it just seemed like this, like you have to question with Errol Spence. They're saying that Errol Spence, his purse was $225,000, and Chris Algieri $325,000. That's understandable because Chris Algieri fought Manny Pacquiao and Amir Khan, and he's a former champion when he fought Ruslan Provodnikov. But you have to think, is this a sign that maybe PBC money is kind of running dry, you know? Because this Errol Spence making $200,000 is kind of low, in my opinion, for PBC standards, especially when you see so many people making money. Also, I'm thinking, well, where was Sugar Ray Leonard? You know, you have to think that maybe there were some budget cuts. Just, you know, just throwing that out there. Just throwing it out there. And of course, there's some, theorists out there that say, well, Al Heyman probably gave him some back-end money from, some pay-per-view buys down in Texas or some shit. You know how they get. But anyway, I'm T Street Controversy. This is T Street Controversy Live. I cover every single major fight live. Please subscribe.